Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Right Space podcast. I'm your host, Robyn-Lee Samuels, and with me is a wonderful guest, Richard Gradner. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's correct. A lot of people do get it wrong because it is a unique surname. In fact, there's no other family in South Africa with the same surname. So a lot of people think it's spelled incorrectly and should be Gardner, but it is in fact
Yes.
it is in fact Gradner.
Yeah.
So it's Gra, not Gar. Um, yeah, and there's a bit of bit of a tidbit of information that's my great grandfather was the first Gradner in South Africa. He was a mayor in Cape Town in the 1930s, and there's in fact a name. Sorry, there's a road named after him on the foreshore because he was part of the foreshore development project when they reclaimed the land for the foreshore. So that's quite interesting.
That's a very fascinating story. And it's nice to have that as a part of your family heritage and your family history, along with such a unique surname. And one of the reasons why I brought you on here is because why I invited you is because of your work with Mustard Agency, which is a digital marketing, branding, identity design agency based here in South Africa. And Richard has also spent over 25 years working within marketing. Among some of the amazing brands he's worked with is Red Bull. And I'm going to give it over to you. What made you get into this line of work?
Throughout my life, I've always been interested in the creative side of work, so to speak, which is why I studied marketing and sales management. I was always interested in advertising and marketing, and when you're really passionate about something, it's important to follow that passion because if you don't, then you end up being miserable in the wrong job, in the wrong profession. So, as I said, I was always excited about marketing and about advertising and about words and writing as well, which for all forms part of it. Marketing is made up of many segments, one of which is copywriting and public relations. That forms part of marketing. So something I was always interested in, crafting copy and working with brands. And from a marketing perspective, branding and marketing is more or less always the same thing. When it comes to brands and branding, it's it can be seen as almost like taking a product or a service and creating a personality around it, and then bringing that personality to life. And that's really what it's about in a nutshell, getting people to fall in love with that personality, that product or service through the marketing, the branding around it. And I got into, you mentioned Red Bull. I was fortunate to be in a position where I was appointed as the first Red Bull brand manager and then became the Red Bull marketing manager for Red Bull in South Africa when we first launched the brand quite some time ago. And I was there for about 6 or 7 years. And the Red Bull experience is almost like going back to varsity because, it was the ABCs of marketing, literally starting from scratch from a different perspective and really getting into branding and marketing on a very powerful level.
And when you look back at your time there, starting with your time at Red Bull, what were some of the highlights, would you say, of being like in that back to varsity environment and learning how to introduce a product that was very lucrative in other parts of the world and introducing it to the South African market? What were some of the highlights there?
Well, we were very fortunate when we first launched Red Bull in South Africa, because we were bringing a brand into the country, first of all, that was in a segment that didn't really exist. The energy drink segment didn't really exist. So we were almost pioneers with a brand like Red Bull in South Africa, and being such a powerful brand internationally, we could really make an impact. And so we saw record sales as a result of the marketing efforts that we put into the brand, because there was very little competition. In fact, when it comes to branding and marketing, you've always got to set a benchmark and then compare yourself to other brands in the category. But it was difficult to do so because there weren't any other energy drinks. The closest we could come to Red Bull was, brands like Energade and Powerade, which had been around for a while. And those aren't energy drinks, they're sports drinks with different properties. But we had to compare ourselves to them, because there was no one else to kind of compare ourselves to. So when it came to research, when we looked at Nielsen figures, for example, we would always compare ourselves against the sports drink market, until other brands came along, like Coca-Cola's Play and various others. Now there's plenty more in the market, and many more will come and go. So it was an exciting time because of the tremendous growth that we experienced as a result of us being the only ones in the market. And as I said, this powerful marketing campaign, which was very unusual. At the time, print advertising was fairly substantial when it came to brands and marketing, but Red Bull's stance was never to do any print advertising. And the publications out there were upset with us because they couldn't understand why such a big brand like Red Bull was not interested in print advertising. We focused on TV, radio, and cinema. The only print marketing or print advertising that we did was in the commercial space. So for example, when it came to trade magazines and trade publications, those are the only places that we would advertise. Or when it came to print advertising, we also try to stay away from banner advertising and outdoor media. In general, it was all about TV, radio, and cinema. So with that stance and with the power of the animated adverts that were, as soon as somebody saw an animation in an advert, they automatically thought of Red Bull. And it was quite interesting to see, and just to see the power of the Red Bull ads. So, all of these experiences and taking a brand from its infancy in South Africa and growing it was the highlight for me.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And was there a specific reason why they chose not to go into print media and solely focus on those three broadcasting areas?
So Red Bull has always been a pioneer, and they wanted to establish themselves as such. They saw print as an inferior medium that they felt they could use their marketing spend better when it came to TV, radio, cinema, and heavily in the sports sector, where they still today have the same strategy of producing a lot of sports content that gets shared across sports channels all over the world. Now, a lot of sports channels only have so much content that they can use. So Red Bull gave them the opportunity to take content that was given to them and use it as fillers in place of, areas in their broadcasting where there wasn't enough content. And it wasn't to say, there was obviously there all these Red Bull branded events, but the Red Bull content was more about ensuring that there was Red Bull exposure through the sports athletes and the branded apparel and the equipment that they use during those sports. And that is what comes through. And that's far more valuable and far more powerful if you compare that to a print advert. When you talk about that exposure on that level and that um, and the power of the brand through sports and extreme sports athletes, which is a very important component of the Red Bull marketing strategy. It just really is so powerful that they just believe that they didn't want to focus on print at all.
So it sounds like a lot of their stance is to, like you mentioned, put their money and put their advertising investment behind the brand, the areas that are going to give them the most exposure and the
Yeah.
most kind of almost virality, where people will continue speaking about like
Yeah.
the Red Bull F1 cars and
Yeah.
those.
I think I
It
think
gives
the
you wings.
I think the
Comments.
yeah I think the biggest lesson to learn. I mean, the Red Bull gives you wings campaign is genius, but I think the biggest lesson to learn from a brand like Red Bull is that there's such a high percentage of investment and turnover that goes back into the brand from a marketing perspective compared to a lot of other brands out there. Most brands only put 5% of their turnover back into marketing, whereas Red Bull is something like I don't know even know the number. It's probably like 30% or something ridiculous. It's like way out there, but that has been part of their success and part of their rapid growth. It's about how much marketing budget they put back into the brand. It's not just marketing budget; it's obviously the strategy and how they do it. But there's always been a massive investment back into the brand. Um, the late owner of the brand, Dietrich Mateschitz, was very much into ensuring that his staff were looked after. He paid them well. He invested in his people heavily. He invested in the sports athletes, which are seen as an extension of the brand and are seen as the Red Bull family. So whenever a sponsored Red Bull sports athlete goes anywhere in the world, they get treated like royalty. They've got their own exclusive product and clothing range that no one else can get. So it's about making it aspirational from that perspective, and people see that and always want Red Bull and want the brand because it's seen as an aspirational brand, and that's all got to do with the marketing strategy.
That's brilliant. So shifting from your work currently at Mustard Agency, what are some of the aspects that you've taken from the lessons that you've taken from that time, and how has that shifted the way that you designed and envisioned uh, Mustard within the ad agency, as an ad agency, as a creative agency
Yeah.
within the space?
So look, I was at Red Bull a long time ago. I was around when digital was still in its infancy. So there's a big shift, a big difference between what I was doing then and what I'm doing now. Because at Mustard, we're a creative and digital agency. Our focus is on the creative side, corporate identity, design, logos, branding, stationery, all that kind of stuff, which is quite traditional. But then a very strong focus on digital. So we design and code websites, and we've been doing that since 2009. And we've probably designed and developed about 900 websites since then. So we've been doing it for a long time. We've got a lot of experience with it. And I'd say that corporate identity design and website design development are the bread and butter of our business. The digital marketing that goes into that is kind of the next phase, because once you've got a corporate identity, a logo, stationery, brand guide, and your website, then the idea is to get people to know about you. And that's where the marketing kicks in, digital marketing. So especially when you're talking about a website, you need people to find the site. Your website is one of millions that are out there. How do you get people to find your site? And that's where the digital marketing comes in. So we offer 4 main services when it comes to digital marketing. There are others, but our main ones are e-marketing, which is the oldest form of digital marketing, the design and coding of newsletters and mailers that get sent out to a database. Then there's SEO, then there's Google Ads, and then there's social media. And within each of those, there's quite a scope because, for example, social media, it's about managing pages, but also advertising. And it's about a lot of other elements within that space. And there are multiple channels and multiple strategies because each one has a different target market. So, for example, LinkedIn targets more corporates as opposed to TikTok, which is more of a youth market. It really depends on the brand and the brand strategy and the target market. The one thing that I can say that I still really talk about when it comes to branding and marketing that I've learned from Red Bull is I use this analogy often where I say, and I mentioned at the beginning, where I say take your product and look at the personality of that product. We used to do that with Red Bull. We used to say, right, let's look at the personality of Red Bull. Who is Red Bull? Who's that person? And we say, well, it's a 16 to 24-year-old that drives this kind of car, wears this kind of deodorant, and drinks this kind of product, eats this kind of food, visits this kind of place. And you kind of build a personality, a person around your brand or your product or service. And once you've got that personality, then you can identify who that person is and who your target market is. And that's critical because, you've got to ensure that that personality is understood by your target market so that you can communicate effectively to them. And the most important thing with marketing is about consistency, ensuring that everything that you communicate is consistently conveyed across to them so that there's no confusion. In other words, a simple example would be you've got a logo, you've got a website, you've got some car branding, you've got some signage, but the font on the signage is different to what the logo looks like, and the color on the car is slightly different to something else. And that's a problem. What we often do at Mustard, my creative agency, is we look at a brand, and if, for example, if the product isn't selling well, then we need to do a brand audit. We start right at the beginning, and we look at all the collateral, ensure that everything's consistent with the communication, and that people see the brand wherever they see it, they get the same consistent message. Whatever they do, whenever they're purchasing the product, whenever there's a message or a tagline or an advert or a campaign, everything needs to look and feel the same. So the analogy is if you're a person and you drive a particular car, you wear certain clothes. Sorry, it's my phone. Sorry about that. And you wear a particular type of clothing. You act in a particular way. People know you. People know who you are. They know your name. They know exactly what you do. They get to know you. And the more they meet you and spend time with you and see you around, the more they recognize you for who you are. But if tomorrow you had to make a couple of changes, and if you had to change your name, for example, you would literally have to almost start from scratch. If you had to, grow a beard, change your clothing, change your name, and start changing your attributes, it means that your personality changes, and then people won't recognize you anymore. It's the same with the brand. You've got to ensure that there's that consistent message. People get used to something, and if you're selling it or promoting it, it needs to have the same consistent message all the time.
Yeah, that's such an important aspect, I think, of starting or such an important starting point. It's something that I do as well with clients that I work with, and when copywriting things for my LinkedIn page, it's starting with that key person, the person that you're speaking to, and it makes it so much easier to then create those campaigns and to create the messaging for it, because
Yeah.
you're speaking to one person as opposed to trying to figure out who in the masses you're trying to attract.
Yeah.
And by attracting that one person, you kind of attract the people on the fringes, the people around them as well. Uh, that's very. Do you have an exercise that you go through with your team when coming up with a brand persona?
There's no real exercise. Look, there's always, we've got a template, for example, when it comes to a brand guide. And a brand guide needs to have, everything from the logo placement, when, how to use the logo, when not to use it, things like typography, so fonts, colors, um, the primary colors, the secondary colors, and this forms part of the brand guide. And that's some people call it a brand Bible, because it's something that represents the foundation of the brand. So if you're talking to a supplier, whether you're briefing someone to create some signage for you or brand your car, you hand them the brand Bible. And so when they're placing the logo, when they're using colors, they ensure that it matches everything in that brand guide. The Pantone colors, etc., etc. So and to craft that document begins with the logo. So the logo design is something that we do a lot of. We do a lot of logo designs. We present our clients with 3 to 5 options that we design based on a brief that we've discussed with the client, the kind of logos he likes, the kind of logos he doesn't like. A lot of it comes down to the personality, again, of the company, of the brand, and what the client wants. So ultimately, once that logo is approved and signed off, then a lot of our a lot of the other elements come from that logo. Once we've designed the logo, then we work on the stationery, email signature, letterhead, business card with QR code, for example, PowerPoint presentation template. So all of those elements also form an extension of the logo and the corporate identity. And once we've got that in place, then we start putting together the brand guide, which, as I said, includes all the rules around the colors, the fonts, the logo, and the other collateral.
What part would you say is, when it comes to like doing your role and working, and all the different kind of plates that you juggle and all the services you provide, what part of your job would you say you enjoy the most?
I think this particular job that I'm in at the moment is enjoyable because there's so much diversity. So I work with so many clients, and it's very seldom boring. Because if there comes a time that you're working with a particular client and things do become boring, you within one day you're working across multiple brands, multiple clients, and there's very little time to get bored, because there's always a new challenge. There's always something exciting. There's always something that comes in that's new, and you're often surprised by all these different requests and the challenge around solving clients' needs makes it exciting and makes it enjoyable. So I think overall, because of the position I'm in, and because I work not only with clients but with my studio, with my designers, with my developers, and get involved in keeping abreast of all the technological changes like AI um, and things to do with design and web and everything. I think it's all exciting. There's always something to learn about. There's always something to to work on that's different to the next. So it's difficult to kind of pinpoint one particular thing, but I think overall, because of the nature of the kind of things I'm involved in, I think that aspect of it is exciting.
I can completely relate to that. It's the same thing I like about the work that I do. It's getting to work with different clients and their different their different personalities, their different niches, and it's almost like each one is a different puzzle that you need to kind of solve and put together. And like that, and it has different challenges as well. Different industries have different challenges. Like you mentioned, like working with a brand that's targeting a TikTok audience versus one that's like very corporate and a bit more buttoned up. Like there are unique challenges to each of those, and making sure that you're able to live up to the values that you as a company have. And I noticed that with most of your website, there's a lot of talking about being bold and thinking differently. So being able to like within each of those different like pockets with each of those clients,
Yeah,
being able to think outside the box, be bold, and actually be different um, is probably quite exciting, I'd imagine.
definitely is.
So what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask, what are some big wins that you've had recently?
Some big wins. um, so there's when it comes to our business, we get a lot of clients that come to us based on referrals and referral work. And it's kind of over time I've realized it's that sort of 80-20 rule where 80% of our clients, and I think it's the same for most sales divisions or most companies that are involved in any kind of sales, 80% comes from the good work that you do and the referrals as a result of that. 80-20% comes from those cold sales calls, chasing people and looking for opportunities. So this is a client of ours we closed quite a big project with him recently, and I went to go see him. It must have been about 5 years ago, and I followed up with him every now and again. And he was let down by his ad agency, so he approached me. He's in the property sector, and as an agency, we've got a lot of experience in property, hospitality. We work with a lot of hotels and hotel groups. And when I say property, we look at a full turnkey sort of project. So we start with coming up with a name for development. In this case, it's a retail development. And then we work on the creative direction. So we put all sorts of ideas together around the design of all the elements, stationery, brochure, website, etc. So we've got a feel for how it's going to look. And then we start designing all the collateral, landing page, website, investor brochure. And once all that's in place, then we launch a campaign which goes out on social media, e-marketing. We design a banner around the property while it's being developed. So all of that, forms part of our campaign. And this was quite a nice project because it's a property development company that's been around for some time, and this is a fairly large development, and then there's a second one coming early next year. So I think that's probably most recently our biggest win for the agency.
What was the mission with that specific project?
Well, it's quite a fascinating story. If you look at traditional property development, this is a retail development in Sea Point, and it's an interesting one because no, I can't really talk about it too much, but I'll just explain that the name of the development um, is a female name, and the idea is that we came up with was to create this like love story that this girl arrives in Cape Town, falls in love with Sea Point, and there's this whole love story around the campaign. The views, the sunsets, the mountain, etc., etc. So that was our angle because, as I said, most property developments are quite traditional in how they package and present themselves, and we wanted to do something quite different.
That's a beautiful story. Like, I think, like living in Cape Town as well and having been to Sea Point, it is kind of that like first date kind of space, and creating that persona around this woman who falls in love with the space is really like it's beautiful. And I think being able to tie storytelling to like the campaign, it's a really cool way to kind of bring everything together. Speaking of storytelling, you're also an author. How did you get into writing?
Um, so I mean, from a young age, I used to write. I mean, I think my first little little book that I wrote must have been about 9 or 10 years old, and it was a little ghost story that I wrote, and I wrote it in like a little um, soft covered little book, and I made the chapters and I colored things in, I drew pictures, and so it's something that I think I've always had inside of me, but I've never had or had a strong enough desire or need to actually write a novel or write anything substantial. Over the years, um, I used to write tidbits of information, and I've got a file with all sorts of things in it, and essays and stories and poems and all sorts of things. And my I thought about it once or twice. I think I started once trying to write something, and then I kind of just gave up because I struggled to create something in my mind that was unique, in the sense that I grew up reading fantasy novels, and obviously I wanted to kind of write in that genre. But after reading fantasy for so many years, I sort of came to this conclusion that I couldn't create anything unique because it had all been done. In other words, always fantasy novels are always about these faraway worlds with magic and um, elves and gnomes and like Lord of the Rings stuff, and I wanted to do something different. So I wrote a book. I read a book in my 20s called "The Lost Children of Mu," and Mu is another name for a continent called Lemuria, which is a mythical place. But there was this guy that wrote this book, wrote about 5 novels actually, and spent the remainder of his life researching and trying to find out more. Um, he claims that he went into some underground caverns and met this monk that shared this information with him about this lost civilization that lived on a continent in the Pacific before the last ice age. So disappeared around 12,000 years ago. Um, and that piqued my interest because it had this mythical feel to it, mythical, magical feel, and there was no evidence that it existed, but a lot of people told stories about it, and I started researching an author by the name of Graham Hancock. You may have heard of. He's got I think a year or two ago, he came out with a documentary. It's like an 8-part documentary about his investigation into Earth's prehistory. So around that time, he calls it the Younger Dryas era, which is around 12,000 years ago when there was a mini ice age. And scientifically, it's been proven that there was a mini ice age, that the Earth's temperatures plummeted, and part of the Earth got frozen over, and a lot of people were wiped out as a result. And he's saying that, and there are people that believe this, that there have been these pre-civilizations before our known history, that there's no evidence that they existed. And then I started researching ancient civilizations and ancient cultures, and then I decided this was the direction that I wanted to go when it came to my writing, to create something that was unique, and that very few people had written about. And it's basically taking these ancient civilizations and ancient cultures and creating fictional stories around them. So my first novel is called Return to Lemuria, which is based on the continent of Lemuria, as I mentioned. And these are all fictional stories. And it's essentially about it begins in Lemuria, when Lemuria existed. And Lemuria was believed to be like Atlantis. There was a civilization living on Lemuria for a couple of 100,000 years, even before Atlantis. Atlantis came after Lemuria. But similar in the sense that they were advanced on a different level to the way we're advanced today. So we're technologically advanced. They were more spiritually advanced, it's believed. So they had telepathic powers, and they could traverse the realm, etc. And so in my story, this ancient civilization gets wiped out, as it's believed to have been, and then several thousand years pass by, and there's some people in the civilization that escaped the cataclysm, and they rebuilt their city underground, and been living underground ever since. So it's a kind of like they come to the surface and want to take over the world, and there's a whole story around that. So that was my first novel. The second one, called Unicorn. It's about the myth of the unicorn. There's no real evidence that the unicorn existed, but if you look at the unicorn, the horn of the unicorn is made of hair, so there's no way that it could have been preserved anyway or anyhow. But there is a diagram that was found in Harappa, which is an ancient city in the Indus River Valley, which depicts an animal with a single horn, and it's engraved onto a stone that they call a seal, that they believe was used as a form of barter of money. And they found many of these seals in this area with different animals on it, but the one with a single horn, they called the unicorn seal, and that seal is about between 3,000 and 5,000 years old. So my story takes place during the time that this civilization existed, and the people at the time believed in the power of the unicorn, and that they used to catch unicorns and then cut their horns off and then grind the powder down and make this potion that made them, that gave them mystical, magical properties. They could do all sorts of things. So, which also explains how unicorns became extinct. And there's a whole adventure story around this time, with a family and a boy that goes looking for some medicine to save his mother who's dying. My third novel is called Servant of Memory, which is about a guy that gets reincarnated 14 times. And every time he gets reincarnated, he remembers his previous life. So he builds up a memory of 14 lifetimes. And in his search to try and find out his purpose in the world, he realized he's a servant to his memory, which is why it's called Servant of Memory. He's almost shackled to his memory until he discovers his purpose, which is to share his memories with the world. So in the near future, in his 14th life, he designs this device that's able to record all his memories, and then he plays them back to the world. But then multiple levels to the story, and each life that he leads is the each life is the person is a very close to a famous inventor or explorer. It's like Nostradamus, Leonardo da Vinci, and various others throughout his lifetimes. And then my latest novel is called Acoustic Alchemy, which is about a girl that inherits psychic powers from her grandmother. She travels with her father, who's an acoustic, he's an archaeoacoustic professor, which is someone that studies ancient sounds in archaeological sites. And so, for example, Stonehenge and various other sites, if you tap on the stones, make a certain sound and a kind of like a vibration. And so him and his daughter traveled to a place called Göbekli Tepe, which is one of Graham Hancock's favorite sites. It's the oldest temple in the world. It's about 11,500 years old, 6,000 years older than the pyramids, and was uncovered, and they found these giant T-shaped pillars. And on the site, they find a flute, which has been petrified. And then they reprint the flute with a digital printer, and this girl who's got these psychic powers blows into the flute, and the frequency that she makes is able to counter gravity. One of the theories of the pyramids is that the ancient people were able to create a certain frequency that allowed heavy objects to become light, which explains how they built the pyramids and how they moved giant megalithic stones around in many ancient cultures. So that theory I've incorporated into my fictional story. And those are the 4 novels that I wrote. My last novel I wrote just before COVID and published it just before COVID, and I haven't written since because during COVID, ChatGPT and various AI learning and writing tools were released, and I was reluctant to start writing again because I was like, I just couldn't get my head around using, because when you write now, I know that it makes an easier tool. But all the research I did through my novels, I didn't have any of those tools available. And now that I do, it's a different, I can see already, it will be a different experience. That's maybe on the negative side, but obviously on the positive side, it'll help speed up my writing. It'll help improve a lot of my work. But each project was a dedicated, disciplined, grueling event. I enjoyed every minute of it, but I trained myself to wake up at 4 a.m. and write till 6.
That's
and
discipline.
then spend a full day working. I've just Monday to Friday, and weekends I took off. So it was kind of like my working week. I'd wake up at 4, train till 6, go to yoga, and then go to work. My first novel I wrote at night. It was too tiring. Late at night, I used to pass out in front of my desktop. In the morning, you are, far more creative. You're fresh. Your brain's fresh, and much more efficient.
Yeah, those all sound really amazing. And I like the idea of like they each have a specific idea tied to either speculative history or theories and myths that we all kind of wonder about, that we all have questions about. And I think that's
Yep.
what makes fantasy, like I enjoy reading fantasy as well. I think that's what makes fantasy so exciting, is that you get to imagine different worlds and you get to create different worlds. And even though, Tolkien kind of ruined it for everyone, um, there's so much more when you're digging into history and you're looking at those ancient cultures, the things that could possibly have existed, and like surviving apocalypses and what a specific world, a specific civilization that is not like ours, what that could look like. It brings so much possibility and so much scope for the imagination to kind of just go. And I like what you mentioned about like the servant of memory, that idea of having this one character travel through kind of different times
Yeah.
without the time travel twist is an interesting,
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting take
Yeah.
on that kind
Yeah.
of storytelling frame.
See, fascinating you say that, because time travel is something that I find it difficult to write about or to explain properly, because there's so many different theories, and whether it's can be done or not. Some people say that you can never go back into the past. Um, there's a possibility to go into the future, but never into the past. At the same time, time itself is, I don't know if you heard of something called um, it's called the eternal now. I don't know if you heard of this
Oh,
theory.
no, I
So
haven't. What is it?
the eternal now is basically saying that there's no such thing as past or present. There's only now. So even though if I'm talking to you about the past, I'm talking to you about the past now. So the past is a memory of now,
Mm,
and past, present, and time. It's all a human construct, and we've been trained to understand it that way. But like there's all these theories about bending space and time. If you say it takes you so much time to get from point A to point B, but if you fold space in half, you can get there in an instant. So then that time is not relevant anymore. But the eternal now is about just understanding that every moment is now. That you you can't. It's about living in the now and understanding that this is now. Every moment is now, because now can never not be now, which means that now is eternal.
mm, that makes sense. That's an interesting. I'm
So
gonna do some. I'm gonna be diving into that rabbit hole probably over the
yeah,
next few days. So
yeah,
thank you for sharing that, and
I think
thank
it's
you for
been a
coming and speaking to me,
pleasure.
Richard. It was
It's a pleasure.
so lovely hearing about your
Yeah.
experiences and um,
Um, and if you like, if your listeners want to, they can pop into my website, richardgradner.com. My first novel, Return to Lemura, is actually free to download. It's on Kindle as a free download. It's what they call on Kindle perma-free, so it's permanently free. It's part of my marketing strategy, just to keep it free, to keep people interested. If they're interested in reading the first one, then I can purchase one of the others. That's all available on Amazon.com, downloadable on Kindle. And I think my books are also available on Takealot, um, physical copies. So they can be ordered, because if you order a physical copy on Amazon, you've got to pay international shipping, because it gets shipped from overseas. That's how they do it. But I know that Amazon is in South Africa. I'm not sure if my books are on Amazon South Africa. They've always been on Amazon International. Um,
I will check out if it is,
yeah.
and
So,
I
so,
will
so
leave
just
all those details in the show notes if you're listening on Spotify and in the description on YouTube. Um,
one more thing I just wanted to add. It will kind of bring us full circle. Spoke about my name being unique. It's just an example of how important a brand name is, and if it is a unique name, how important it is to ensure that it is unique. Because if you type my name into Google, because it's such a unique name, and because I've been in marketing for so long, the first 4 pages of Google are just me.
That's pretty cool. That's like Seth Godin. He's the only person who comes up if you type Seth into Google. Well, Richard, it was definitely a pleasure speaking to you. And to all your listeners, go give Richard some love, look at his pages, check out his books. And yeah, I will see you guys next week, same time. Bye.